enough stuff to go around, appetites outrun resources, therefore we have to make hard choices. First rule of politics is to ignore the first rule of economics. And CATO exists to try to call people back to facts and to realism. I want to say a few words, just enough to stir some conversation after this about CATO's role. I mean, I'm a journalist, and all journalists are generalists. We rely on reliable experts, which is why, can you hear me now? No. Audio people. Hello? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh. Can you hear in the back now? Better. All right, well, I'll stay. How's this? Okay, is the audio fella here? Turn up the volume. There he is, he's over there. Got it? All right, very good. Can you hear if I step away? Yeah. Good, all right. Well, anyway, I think any public speaker ought to have a clear theme. I'll tell you, my model as a public speaker is the late Conrad Hilton, who appeared late in his life on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Carson said, Mr. Hilton, you're a giant of American attainment, a legend in your time. Turn to that camera right over there and tell the American people the one thing, based on your life's work, you'd most like to tell them. Like a great trooper, Hilton turned to the camera, looked the country in the eye and said, please, put the curtain inside the tub. It's like a certain metaphysical suite, but if you owned $250,000 bathtubs, you'd say the same thing. My simple message is, right now we hear a lot about the threat to democracy. I think the biggest threat to American democracy right now is American democracy for the following reason. There's a lot talked about today about the discord in America, and God knows it's real enough, but I'm much more alarmed by the consensus in America. It's as broad as the Republic, it's as deep as the Grand Canyon, and it is essentially this. We should run, even with full employment, even at rapid economic growth, we should run large deficits forever. Because the political class is united on one thing. The political class is much more united by self-interest than it is divided by ideology. And it is in its self-interest to give the American people $1 worth of government and charge them 75 cents for it. Fobbing off the other 25% on Peter's grandson, who will be enough to pay for this. Now the question is, how long can we go on doing this? The American people are too often ideologically conservative, but operationally liberal. That is, they want to have a large, omnipresent, omniprovident government and low taxes. And this is getting to be ruinous. In the last fiscal year, we went from $32 trillion national debt to $34 trillion, $2 trillion increase in 1 year. 1 year. Soon, debt service is going to be larger than defense, larger than Social Security. Soon, debt service will be the largest federal program, paying money on the money we have borrowed. Give you some idea about this. In 1916, there was a surge in Standard Oil stocks price. And John D. Rockefeller became the first American billionaire. He could have written a check in 2016 for his net worth and retired our national debt. Today, Jeff Bezos could write a check for his net worth and not pay 3 months interest on our national debt. Now the question is, how long can we go on doing this? People say, well, so far so good. Reminds me, as everything does, if you'll forgive me, of a baseball story. 1951, Lawrence Spahn, on the way to becoming the winningest left-handed pitcher in the history of baseball, pitching for the then Boston Braves against the then New York Giants in the then Polo Grounds. Giants sent up to the plate a rookie who was 0 for 12. Clearly this kid had never hit big league pitching. He was a kid named Willie Mays. Spawn stood on the mound 60 feet 6 inches from home plate, fires the ball, Mays crushes it. First hit, first home run. After the game, the sports writers went up to Spawn in the clubhouse. Spawny, what happened? Spawn said, gentlemen, for the first 60 feet, that was a hell of a pitch. It's not good enough in baseball, it's not good enough in. The fact is, we have to begin to do what CATO exists to do, which is face facts and make other people face them. Warren Buffett has a cure for deficit spending, simple constitutional amendment, not balanced budget amendment, that's too complicated. It simply says when the deficit is more than 1% of GDP, no sitting legislator will be eligible for re-election. They balance the budget by 2%. The problem is that we now have built an entitlement state that is making enormous calls on our future resources of this country. And I want to explain what's going on with reference to two women, Ida Mae Fuller and Irene Triplett. First, I'll tell you about Irene Triplett. Irene, who died recently in a North Carolina nursing home in her 90s, was the last person to receive a Civil War pension, $78 a month. Her father, Mose, married at age 83 in 1924. He married a 28-year-old woman. Way to go, Mose. 6 years later, they had Irene as a child. Moral of the story is longevity is something, it's a wonderful thing. It's a great social achievement, but it's tremendously expensive when you have a welfare state that exists to transfer wealth from the working young and middle aged to the retired elderly in the form of pensions and health care. Which brings us to Ida Mae Fuller. Ida Mae Fuller of Ludlow, Vermont. She'd been a high school classmate of Calvin Coolidge, the last president with whom I fully agreed. Ida Mae was the first American to receive a regular monthly Social Security check in 1940. She paid into the system a grand total of $22 in Social Security taxes. Then, in an act of very reckless citizenship, she turned on her country and lived to be 100. Collecting in the process $24,000 in benefits. It didn't matter at that point. There were 40 workers for every retiree. By 1960, there were 5 for every retiree. Today, there are 2.7 for every retiree. How long can this go on? We know, it's a matter of simple arithmetic, when, and it's in the next few years, the Social Security Trust Fund will be exhausted. People say, well, it's in the law, we'll cut benefits. Rubbish. There won't be any benefits cut. They'll simply have a one-sentence amendment to the Social Security law and will pour more borrowed revenues into Social Security. Again, how long can we keep going on? Longevity is a wonderful thing, but that's the problem. The welfare state we have today exists to subsidize two things that did not exist in 1965 when, with enactment of the Social Security system, we began to build an entitlement state. Those two things are protracted retirement and competent medicine. In 1965, when Congress set the retirement age at 65, 1935, when they set it at 65, the life expectancy of an American male was 65. Congress did its ruthless arithmetic in those days. Retirement was an unknown luxury for all but a tiny sliver of the American people who worked until they could work no longer, and then they died shortly thereafter. Today, people spend at least a third of their adult lives on Social Security. It was never built for this. And this, again, it's a wonderful thing. I'm not against the elderly. I am elderly. I'm 82 years old. I know whereof I speak here. But the simple fact is, Social Security needs fixing. The good news is it's easy to fix. Easy to fix. raise the retirement age faster than the absurd small steps we're taking. If in 1935 we indexed the retirement age to life expectancy, the retirement age today in America would be 73, and we'd have no Social Security problem. The big problem, ladies and gentlemen, is medicine. It is healthcare, on which Cato writes extensively and wisely. Every day, 10,000 more baby boomers retire into the Medicare Social Security system. By the time they've all retired, all 78 million of them, in 2030, the average age of the American population coast to coast will be higher than it is today in the great state of Florida, which is justly known as God's antechamber. The fastest growing, in percentage terms, age cohort that the Census Bureau keeps track of are Americans 85 years old or older. This matters because the average health care costs for an 85-year-old are 5 times higher than those for a 55-year-old. Demography is destiny for an entitlement state, and we have some hard thinking to do. Let me talk to you just a little bit about medicine, because again, so many of our problems are the problems of success. Longevity is a great success. Competent medicine is a social success. But in 1900, most Americans were born at home, died at home. And the most that medicine could do for them when they got sick was keep them more or less comfortable while nature healed them or killed them. Americans in 1900 spent twice as much money on funerals as they spent on medicine. One mother in every 100 died in childbirth in 1900. 10% of newborns in 1900 died before their first birthday. Only 17% of American deaths in 1900 were of Americans over 65. Today it's 75%. Infectious diseases killed 37% of Americans in 1900. Today it's 2%. Today, Medicaid is the largest item in almost every state's budget. If we'd had national income statistics in 1900, which we didn't do, but if we had, healthcare, medicine would have been too small a part of our economy. Today, the healthcare section of the American economy, which is 18% of the economy, is larger than all but 4 nations' economies. I say to you, Pittsburgh, you say steel. No, they don't make any steel in Pittsburgh to speak of anymore. Largest employer in Pittsburgh is the University of Pittsburgh because of its health center. If I say to you, Cleveland, you think archetypal Rust Belt manufacturing city, maybe. Largest employer in Cleveland is the Cleveland Clinic. The second largest employer is another healthcare provider. 6 of the 10 largest employers in the state of Ohio are healthcare providers. This is our future. 1924, when the sainted Calvin Coolidge was in the White House, with access to the best medicine the country had to offer, his son, Calvin Jr., played tennis without socks. He got a blister, he got infected. He died a lingering, agonizing death. There was nothing medicine could do. I was born in 1941 in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, a university town, good hospitals. But I'm sure, because it was true of almost all hospitals then, the hospital I was born in, its principal expense was clean linen. This was before MRIs and CAT scans and electron microscopes and laser surgery and all the rest of the diagnostic, therapeutic, pharmacological marvels we have, but are having trouble paying for. Because we don't have markets, it's part of the problem. Can I ask a show of hands here? Will you guys, men and women, go to the doctor and the doctor says, I'd like to give you the following test. How many of you say, how much is that going to cost? Show of hands. One liar down front. Why do you ask? The doctor doesn't know anyway. And it could cost twice as much or half as much on the other side of town. developing markets, which is what Cato is in the business of, is going to save us, or nothing is. Medicine is going to swallow our economy with an aging population. That is why we have a constant drumbeat now to say, well, we're going to get out of this by taxing the rich. This is partly because we have now decided that envy, instead of being one of the 7 deadly sins, is a virtue. We have an entire tax code that has codified envy. Never mind the fact that envy, I don't know if you ever thought of this, is the only one of the 7 deadly sins that doesn't give the sinner even momentary pleasure. I'll pause, good nervous laughter. I'll pause while you go down the list. You know, Mark Twain could be a great scourge of the rich. One of his best friends was a hugely successful executive of Standard Oil. And one of his friends, a journalist, once said to him, "Mr. Twain, do you think your friend's wealth is tainted?" Twain said, "You're damn right, it's doubly tainted. It taint yours and it taint mine." As we talk, one of the great issues in America today, one that Cato is dealing with, if you defend markets, you're defending a meritocracy. You're defending, that is, merit as the basis of allocating wealth and opportunity in our society. Well, we're beginning to rethink equality in America. 200 years ago, the great source of wealth was land. We had so much of it, we were giving it away. Then, about the turn of the 20th century, the great source of wealth was heavy fixed capital. Think of Andrew Carnegie's steel mills or Cornelius Vanderbilt's New York Central Railroad. Today, the great source of wealth is mind, information. We have an increasingly cognitively stratified society. Greater and greater rewards going to those who think clearly and well. That's why the bitterness in our politics today owes a great deal to what's called the diploma divide. Those who do, they're about 1/3 of the country, have 4-year college degrees, and the 2/3 who don't, and who feel somehow left out of American prosperity. That's part of the problem. The other problem is something we don't want to talk about. After the George Floyd murder and the riots that ensued, we had a tremendous argument in this country about race and inequality. And we talked about every aspect of it except far and away the most important. And that goes back to 1965 also, when the man who became my very best friend, Pat Moynihan, became a 4-term senator from New York, was a social scientist working in the Labor Department. And he published a report called The Crisis of the Negro Family, the Case for National Action. He said, we have a crisis in America because 23.7% of African American children are born to unmarried women. Today it's 69%. Today 40% of all American first births, regardless of race, color, creed, national origin, 40% are to unmarried women. And majority of mothers under the age of 30 are not living with the fathers of their children. Now, social science has taught us a lot about the importance of family structure as a predictor of life opportunities. You cannot do without it. Particularly because unparented adolescent males are a problem without a father in the home. I have raised 3 boys. I know that the whole point of civilization is to civilize adolescent males. Well, just at a moment when the aging of the population and the declining birth rate and the competence of medicine all require more and more revenues for the government, just at this point, we're beginning to flinch from what Cato exists to defend, which is the dynamism of a market society. A lot of Americans are distraught by the velocity of events. The velocity is all around us, and aren't we glad? 1994, there was an online bookseller in suburban Seattle called Jeff Bezos. He had a thing called Amazon, a little bookstore. Now look at it. We've seen the enormous velocity of change is unsettling to a great many people. And what it does is it disrupts. Some people like disruption. Some people don't. And if you don't like disruption, you don't like a market society. You don't like the idea that tomorrow is unknown. We're going to find out. You try and freeze things. Freeze the status quo. That's why we're constantly being plied and belabored by the arguments of social hypochondria and economic hypochondria. Nothing's working right. That's the argument that always leads to the government solving things. It leads to industrial policy, the government allocating capital. It leads, therefore, as night and day, to crony capitalism. Today, we're hearing much about the deindustrialization of America and the manufacturing crisis. This is a reprise of something we heard in the 1980s. Japan, according to a young New York real estate developer at the time, named Trump, Japan is going to eat our lunch. Japan was taking over the world. Japan bought Rockefeller Center, and we were all supposed to panic. By the way, it's back in American hands, not that anyone noticed or should care, but anyway. The U.S. global share of manufacturing output today, in the midst of our supposed crisis, is larger than the shares of Japan, Germany, South Korea, and India combined. Some crisis. No, we don't make as many textiles as we used to. Instead, we make electronic equipment and medical equipment and computer stuff. Productivity has indeed reduced the number of employees in manufacturing. In 1980, it took 10 man-hours to make a ton of steel. Today, it takes 90 minutes. And isn't that a good thing? Here's the thing. Everything that CATO stands to explain, all the bad arguments that CATO regularly slays with facts, lead to one thing, and that is making the government central to our lives. Ted Kennedy once said, "All change in America begins at the ballot box." Perfect expression of the progressive view that government is and ought to be the source of creativity in society. The senior senator from Delaware, a man named Biden, said while running for vice president in 2008, he says, "Every important idea of the last 2 centuries has depended on government vision and incentive." That is refuted by every page of American history. In the 1790s, a young Yale graduate went south to Georgia to be a tutor on a plantation. And this young man named Eli Whitney got tired of hearing people complain about the problem of separating cotton seeds from cotton fiber, so he invented the cotton gin. That made the plantation system economical. It led to the spread of slavery. It brought on the Civil War and the modern world, which was rather a lot of change, and it didn't begin at the ballot box. It began in the spark of genius in one entrepreneur's head. In the 1830s, in the Midwest, where men are men and I am from, in the town of Grand Detour, Illinois, you can't make this stuff up, a young blacksmith got interested in devising a self-scouring steel plow that could turn the heavy black topsoil of the Midwest. Today his name is on big green machines all over the world. His name was John Deere. Didn't begin at the ballot box. When Alexander Graham Bell's voice came crackling down that wire saying, "Watson, come here, I want you." When Ray Kroc of the great state of Illinois drove into, you know that Ray Kroc and Walt Disney were in the same National Guard unit? Big Mac and Mickey Mouse in one unit. Anyway, when Ray Kroc drove into the McDonald's Brothers restaurant in San Bernardino, California, and says, I got an idea. It became not just a great corporation, but a whole industry. Didn't begin at the ballot box. Let me ask you to come with me to a crime scene, because I want to illustrate what happens when government really believes that it is and ought to be the source of creativity, not individuals. I want you to come with me to a crime scene. The crime occurred in the spring of 1934, early in the New Deal. The crime scene is 135 Griffith Street in Jersey City, New Jersey, right across the river from the spires of Manhattan. Today, I visited the neighborhood recently. Today, as then, it's full of immigrants. Now they're from Asia and Latin America, then they were from Eastern Europe. 138 Griffith Street was a men's tailoring and pressing shop run by Joseph Magid, immigrant from Poland, father of 2 daughters, 49 years old. The crime he committed was he put in his shop window a sign that said he would press a man's suit for 35 cents. How, you may wonder, did that become a crime in the land of the free and the home of the brave? I'll tell you. The New Deal had a theory, and it was that in the Depression, prices fall. Therefore, huge non sequitur, therefore, the New Deal said if we could force prices to rise, we'll cure the Depression. Therefore, they passed the National Industrial Recovery Act, the point of which was to cartelize American businesses, to stop competition, because competition drove down prices. They wrote codes of competition, actually codes of non-competition, for about 500 industries. Corncob pipes, women's girdles, everything. This was enforced, by the way, by the National Recovery Administration. Its symbol was a blue eagle. People were encouraged to put the blue eagle sign in their shop windows or to fly the blue eagle flag over their factories. The Philadelphia Eagles football team was founded at this time and named in honor of the NRA, which is why all good Americans hate the Philadelphia Eagles. Washington, which knows everything, had decided that the correct price to press a man's suit was 40 cents. For his nickel crime, Magid was arrested, fined $100. Doesn't sound like much. The median family income that year was $1,700. And sentenced to 30 days in jail for his nickel economic crime in America. Well, the judge in the case thought this was a teachable moment, so he hauled Magid into court, and according to the New York Times, I quote, gave him a little lecture on the importance of cooperation as opposed to individualism. Well, Magid left the court, duly chastened, went back to his, with the New York Times in tow, went back to his shop and removed the offending sign offering a 35-cent pressing job and replaced it with the blue eagle. And the New York Times the next morning said, Magid, if not quite so ruggedly individualistic as formerly, was a free man once more. He's a free man if you define freedom as obeying a government propaganda program under threat of fines and imprisonment. I don't. Neither does CATO. That is the future of the United States if we're not careful, because government tends to expand unless people are there pushing back and refuting it with ideas, which is what CATO exists to do. Now, we are not Bangladesh, our society. We can get better by choosing to get better. Decline is a choice. Let's not make it. Let's do what CATO is doing, which is stand up for that rugged individualism, for that entrepreneurial individualism that has made America so wealthy that large political forces exist to be parasitic of that wealth. Margaret Thatcher once said, sooner or later socialists run out of other people's money. That's our future unless we, all of us here, who support CATO and all that it makes vivid and articulate. And that's my message. You've heard enough from me. You're probably feeling the way Jeff Torberg did when he was managing the White Sox. He went out one day to take a picture out of the game. Kitchen and Jimmy Kern, they got to the mound and Kern said, Skipper, I'm not tired. Torberg said, we know you're not tired, but our outfielders are. So on that note, I will subside and I welcome your questions. Thank you very much.